I didn't think knocking on my son's door that day would be the moment everything finally broke. I thought it might be awkward, maybe quiet, maybe uncomfortable. I never imagined I would walk away feeling like I had done something wrong just by showing up. Thanksgiving was supposed to bring us together. Instead, it showed me how far apart we already were. If stories like this feel familiar to you, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. That morning started quietly. Too quietly. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every small sound. The heater clicked on and off. The clock in the living room ticked louder than usual. Even the refrigerator seemed louder when it hummed back to life. I woke up before the sun, even though I had nowhere to be. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the same thoughts over and over. I told myself I didn't have to go. I told myself it was okay to stay home. I told myself I was too old to be putting myself in uncomfortable situations. But Thanksgiving has always meant something to me, not because of the food, not because of traditions, but because it meant people. It meant sitting around a table and hearing voices overlap. It meant feeling like you belonged somewhere, even if only for a few hours. Lately, belonging had felt like a distant memory. I hadn't seen my son in months. The calls had slowly faded. When I reached out, the conversations were short, polite, rushed. He always sounded busy, like talking to me was something he needed to get through before moving on to something more important. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself this was just adulthood. Life, work, responsibilities. I reminded myself that children grow up and parents are supposed to step back. Still, there were nights when the silence felt heavier than it should have. I sat up slowly and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was cold beneath my feet. I stood there for a moment, steadying myself, then walked into the kitchen. Morning light filtered faintly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the counter. I stood in the middle of the kitchen holding my coat for a long time. I didn't put it on right away. I just stood there, turning it over in my hands, listening to my thoughts argue with each other. You don't want to intrude. He probably already has plans. You should have called first. What if he doesn't want you there? But then another thought came, quieter but stronger. He's my son. That thought carried more weight than all the others combined. I decided not to call ahead. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of the answer. Afraid he might hesitate. Afraid he might say it wasn't a good time. Afraid he might give me a reason not to go. I moved to the stove and decided to cook something small. Nothing elaborate, just one dish. Something he used to like when he was younger. I remembered him standing beside me in the kitchen years ago, asking questions, sneaking bites before it was ready. I moved slowly as I cooked, measuring carefully, stirring gently. I wasn't rushing. I didn't want to rush. Something about the routine felt grounding, like it connected me to a version of myself that still believed things could be okay. When the dish was finished, I let it cool slightly, then transferred it into a container. I wiped the edges clean and pressed the lid on firmly. I remember smoothing the top with my hand, almost without thinking, as if being careful could somehow protect me from what might come next. Before leaving, I stood in the doorway of my living room and looked around. Everything felt still. The furniture, the walls, the quiet. It felt like the house was holding its breath. The bus ride felt longer than usual. I took a seat near the window and watched the city pass by. Families boarded together, carrying covered dishes and bags. The children laughed loudly. Parents smiled tired smiles and reminded them to sit down. No one noticed me, and that wasn't unusual. But that day, it felt heavier than usual. I thought about when my son was little. How he used to wait by the door on holidays, pacing back and forth, asking every few minutes if guests were coming yet. I remembered how he would run to the window when he heard a car pull up, his face lighting up. I wondered when I stopped being someone he waited for. When I got off the bus and walked toward his street, the first thing I noticed was the cars. They lined both sides of the road, bumper to bumper, as far as I could see. It looked like everyone had found somewhere to be. Laughter drifted through open windows. Somewhere nearby, music played softly. The air smelled like food and cold autumn leaves. I slowed my steps as I approached his house. I stopped once to adjust my scarf, then again to smooth my sleeves. I checked my reflection in a car window and straightened my posture. I didn't want to look like a problem. I wanted to look welcome. My heart started racing before I even reached the door. I stood there for a moment, telling myself to breathe. Then I knocked gently. When no one answered right away, I knocked again, a little firmer this time. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened, but only halfway. He stood there, blocking the entrance. The look on his face wasn't surprising. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even confusing. It was irritating. "Who invited you?" he said. For a moment, I honestly thought I misheard him. The words didn't make sense at first. I smiled, because that's what mothers do when they're confused and trying to keep the peace. "I just came for Thanksgiving," I said. "I didn't want to be alone today." He glanced at the dish in my hands, then past me toward the street, then back at my face. "This is only for the family," he said. The sentence landed slowly, like it needed time to sink in. "I am your family," I replied, my voice quieter than I expected. That's when his expression changed. His voice dropped. It became colder. "Just leave, old woman." He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. That was somehow worse. He spoke like he was embarrassed, like I was something that needed to be handled quickly and quietly. I could hear people inside, plates clinking. Someone was laughing loudly. The smell of food drifted out into the cold air. Warm light spilled out from behind him while I stood outside, suddenly aware of how thin my coat felt. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because my body didn't know what else to do. The door closed. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, then turned and walked down the street. I didn't want anyone to see my face. I walked until I found a bench a little distance away and sat down. I was still holding the dish I brought. The food was warm. My hands were shaking. I told myself I would leave in a minute, just long enough to catch my breath. Just long enough for the feeling in my chest to settle. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then an hour. Cars came and went. Laughter continued. The house stayed bright, and I was still there. Because a part of me believed he might come out, that he might reconsider, that he might realize what he had said. He never did. But the next morning, something happened that neither of us was prepared for. And that was the moment everything began to change. I thought the worst part was over once I left his street. I was wrong. The worst part didn't come from what he said to me. It came from what I had to sit with afterward, from the silence, from the night that followed. If you're still listening and this story feels close to home, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The bus ride home felt different than the one earlier that day. Everything looked the same outside the window, but nothing felt the same inside me. The streets were still busy. Families were still moving from place to place. Lights glowed in windows as people gathered around tables that were already set. I sat there holding the container in my lap, staring straight ahead. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking anymore either. I felt empty, like something had been removed and my body hadn't caught up yet. When I reached my stop, I stepped off the bus slowly. The air felt colder than before. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. I walked the short distance to my house and unlocked the door. The quiet rushed to meet me. It wasn't peaceful and quiet. It was the kind of quiet that presses in on you from all sides. I turned on the light and set the container down on the kitchen counter. The food inside was still warm. That detail hurt more than I expected. I took off my coat and hung it up carefully, the same way I always did. Habits don't disappear just because your heart feels heavy. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wall, unsure of what to do next. Normally on Thanksgiving, I would still be cooking at that hour, timing dishes, checking the oven, setting the table. That night there was nothing to prepare for. I sat down at the kitchen table, just one chair pulled out. The rest stayed tucked in. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a relative, anyone. But I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to hear pity in someone's voice. And I didn't want anyone to feel angry on my behalf, so I didn't call anyone. I warmed up a small portion of what I had brought and ate it alone. Not because I was hungry, but because it felt wrong to let it go to waste. Each bite reminded me why I had made it in the first place. When I finished, I rinsed the plate and put it away. I wiped the counter. I turned off the light. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, like I needed to prove to myself that I was still functioning. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, listening to the same familiar sounds. The heater, the clock, the occasional car passing by outside. My mind replayed the moment at the door over and over, but not the way people expect. I didn't keep hearing his voice. I kept seeing his face, the way he didn't hesitate, the way he looked past me. The way of closing the door seemed so easy for him. I asked myself all the questions mothers ask when something like this happens. Where did I go wrong? Was I too strict? Not strict enough? Did I push too much? Did I step back too far? I thought about every sacrifice I had made when he was growing up. The late nights, the missed opportunities. The times I chose him over myself without even thinking twice. I didn't regret any of it. But that night, I wondered when those choices stopped meaning anything. At some point, I fell asleep without realizing it. I woke up early the next morning, the same way I always did. For a few seconds, I forgot what day it was, then it all came rushing back. My chest felt tight as I sat up in bed. I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I didn't drink it right away. I just held the mug in both hands, letting the warmth sink in. Outside, the street was quieter than the day before. Thanksgiving was over. People were already moving on. I told myself I needed to do the same. I was rinsing the mug when my phone rang. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up. I wasn't expecting anyone to call. The name on the screen made my heart skip. It was him. I hesitated, just for a second, then I answered. His voice sounded different than it had the day before. Quieter, uncertain. "Did you get home okay?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected concern. I hadn't expected anything at all. "Yes," I said, "I did." There was a pause. I could hear movement in the background. Dishes, maybe, someone else in the room. "I shouldn't have said what I said yesterday," he finally said. He didn't apologize, not really, but it was the closest thing to it. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. There were so many things I could have said, things I had rehearsed in my head overnight, but none of them came out. "I just wanted to check," he added. "That's all." We ended the call shortly after. No resolution, no explanation, just that. I stood there holding my phone long after the screen went dark. I thought that would be the end of it. It was. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. That alone felt strange. No one ever came by unannounced anymore. I walked slowly toward the door, my heart pounding in a way I didn't understand. When I opened it, someone I hadn't expected was standing there. Not my son, someone else. And what they said to me in the next few minutes changed the way I understood everything that had happened the day before. They told me things I didn't know, things that had been said about me, things that had been left out of every conversation, things that explained more than I was ready to hear. I didn't interrupt, I just listened. By the time they finished speaking, my hands were trembling again, not from pain this time, but from clarity. For the first time since Thanksgiving morning, something shifted inside me. I realized that what happened at that door wasn't just about one day. It was about choices that had been building for a long time, and the next choice would be mine. I didn't answer the door right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed a moment to steady myself. Whatever was coming next, I could feel it. The kind of moment that doesn't announce itself loudly, but still manages to change things forever. If you're still listening and this story speaks to you, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. When I finally opened the door, I was surprised by who was standing there. It wasn't my son, it was his wife. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure she should be there at all. She held her purse tightly against her side and shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Can I come in for a minute?" she asked. Her voice was polite but strained. I nodded and stepped aside, letting her into the house. She glanced around as she walked in, taking in the quiet, the simplicity, the way everything seemed frozen in place. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I had sat at alone the night before. She didn't sit right away. She hovered for a moment, then finally pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "I didn't know you were coming yesterday," she said quietly. I nodded. "I didn't tell anyone." There was a pause. She took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. "That's not what I meant," she said. "I didn't know you weren't invited." The words settled between us, heavy, unavoidable. She went on before I could respond. "He told us you weren't coming," she said. "He said you had other plans, that you didn't like big gatherings anymore." I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain exactly, recognition. She looked up at me then, finally meeting my eyes. There was guilt there, and something else, regret. "When I saw you outside," she continued, "I didn't understand what was happening. By the time I realized, the door was already closed." She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. I sat quietly, listening. I wasn't angry at her. If anything, I felt tired. Tired of the gaps between words. Tired of the stories people tell to make their lives easier. "There's been a lot said," she added. "Things I didn't question. Things I should have." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, then hesitated. She didn't hand it to me. She just held it, like the weight of it mattered. "He's been saying you don't want to be involved anymore," she said. "That you criticize everything, that you make things uncomfortable." I let out a slow breath. I had heard versions of this before. Not directly, never directly, but enough times to recognize the pattern. "I didn't know how to fix it," she said. "So I stayed quiet." I nodded again. Silence has become familiar to me lately. It seemed to follow me everywhere. She stood up after a few minutes, clearly unsure of what else to say. At the door, she paused. "I'm sorry," she said, "for yesterday. And for everything before it." After she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty street. The house felt different now, not lighter, but clearer. For the first time, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate to answer. He didn't waste time with small talk. "She came by, didn't she?" he asked. "Yes," I said. There was a pause, longer than the one the day before. "She shouldn't have," he said. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. "She wanted to explain," I replied. Another pause. "She didn't need to," he said. This didn't have to be a big thing. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the counter. My body felt tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "It was already a big thing," I said. "You just didn't want to deal with it." His voice sharpened slightly. "You're overreacting." I almost laughed, almost. "I stood outside your door on Thanksgiving," I said calmly. "I don't think that's an overreaction." He exhaled loudly. "You always do this," he said. "You make things uncomfortable." There it was, the same word his wife had used earlier. "I didn't raise my voice," I said. "I didn't cause a scene. I left when you told me to." "That's not the point," he replied. "No," I said quietly. "That's exactly the point." The silence stretched between us again. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I didn't think it would hurt you like this," he finally said. "That hurt more than anything else." "You didn't think so," I replied. "That's the problem." We ended the call shortly after, not angrily, just unfinished. That evening I went for a walk. I needed air, space, time to think. The neighborhood was calm. People were already taking down decorations, returning to routine. Life always moves forward, whether you're ready or not. I thought about all the times I had made excuses for him, all the times I told myself he didn't mean it, that he was stressed, that he didn't realize how his words landed. I realized something then. Intent doesn't erase impact, love doesn't excuse cruelty, and being a parent doesn't mean accepting disrespect. When I got home, I sat down and wrote a message. Not long, not dramatic, just honest. I told him I loved him. That wouldn't change. But I also told him I wouldn't be showing up uninvited anymore. I wouldn't put myself in a position to be humiliated again. And if he wanted a relationship, it would have to include basic respect. I read the message twice before sending it. My hands didn't shake this time. He didn't respond that night, or the next day. A week passed, then another, and something unexpected happened in that silence. I felt calmer. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring. I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head. I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment. I focused on small things, morning routines, walks, conversations with people who showed up willingly. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message, not from him, from her. "He wants to talk," it read. "Really talk, don't argue." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't answer right away. Because for the first time, the choice was truly mine. I didn't answer the message right away, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish him, but because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't rushing to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. I sat with the phone in my hand and let the silence exist. That alone felt unfamiliar. For years, I had been the one filling gaps, smoothing tension, explaining feelings that weren't explained back to me. This time, I waited. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it slowly. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't distract myself. I sat by the window and watched the sky change as the sun went down. The neighborhood settled into its usual rhythm. Cars passed. Lights flickered on in houses nearby. I thought about Thanksgiving again, not the door, not the words, but the feeling that followed. The moment I realized how small I had made myself just to stay connected. I understood something clearly then. I didn't want an apology just to ease the pain. I didn't want excuses. I didn't want promises that sounded good but changed nothing. I wanted honesty. The next morning, I sent a short reply. "Tell him he can come by tomorrow afternoon." When he arrived, he didn't knock the way he used to. The knock was softer, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he had the right anymore. I opened the door and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had eaten alone on Thanksgiving night. Neither of us spoke at first. He stared at his hands. I watched his face. He looked older than I remembered. Tired in a way that went beyond work or stress. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that," he finally said. "There's no excuse for it." I didn't interrupt him. "I've been trying to keep everyone happy," he continued. "And somewhere along the way, I started treating you like you'd always understand, like you'd always adjust." I nodded slowly. "That's because I always did," I said. He looked up at me then, really looked at me. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you," he said. "I didn't think you'd feel it the way you did." "That's the problem," I replied. "You didn't think." We sat with that for a moment. The air between us was heavy, but it wasn't hostile. It was honest. "I don't need to be chosen over anyone," I said quietly. "I just need to be treated with respect." He nodded. "I understand. I won't show up where I'm not wanted anymore," I added. "And I won't stay silent when something hurts me." There was no argument, no defensiveness, just acceptance. We talked for a long time after that. Not about the past in detail, but about what needed to change. About boundaries. About communication. About the difference between love and obligation. When he left that afternoon, nothing felt magically fixed, but it felt real. In the weeks that followed, things were different. Slower, more intentional. He called before visiting, he listened more. And when I spoke, he didn't dismiss it. We were rebuilding, not the way things were, but the way they should have been all along. Thanksgiving will always stay with me now. Not because of the pain, but because it was the moment I finally chose my own dignity. Sometimes, that choice doesn't end relationships. Sometimes, it reshapes them. And sometimes, it teaches you that loving yourself is not abandonment, it's survival. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from.